Welcome to Ultimate Ukraine YouTube channel. The war in Ukraine has been quite striking and critical this week. While the activity continued in the Donetsk region, the conflict on the southern front lines of Ukraine suddenly flared up. Let's dive right now into the areas of hot breaking points occurring on the front lines of the battlefield. In the past day, units of the armed forces of Ukraine repelled Russian attacks near more than 20 settlements in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. The danger is high that Russia will launch more air and missile attacks throughout Ukraine. The Russians do not give up their intention to seize the entire Donetsk region. They are conducting offensive operations in the Bakhmut and Avdiivka directions. Also, on the Kupiansk, Lyman and Novopavlivka directions, the invading troops are trying to improve their tactical position, and on the Zaporizhia and Kherson directions, they remain on the defensive. In the direction of Melitopol, the actions of the Ukrainian partisan groups and the striking operations of the Ukrainian soldiers are continuing rapidly. As the intensity of the attacks continued fiercely in the eastern regions of Ukraine, as we mentioned, the Ukrainian armed forces began to carry out mind-blowing operations on the southern front lines, especially in the heart of the war, namely in Crimea and its environs. While the attention was on the eastern regions of Ukraine, with this astonishing tactic of Kyiv, Russia took a heavy blow from an unexpected place. A series of explosions occurred yesterday in southern Ukraine. The Russian-appointed governor of Crimea announced that Russian air defense systems have been activated across the entire western part of the peninsula. It seems that Ukrainian forces have sent dozens of drones to the peninsula to destroy Russian military bases in Crimea. There are many Russian warplanes that can be targeted at Russian airports in Crimea, as the Russians have withdrawn their planes from Kherson due to the HIMARS long-range missile attacks by Ukrainian artillery units. Ukrainian forces want to destroy Russian warplanes in Crimea for two reasons. The first reason is to reduce airstrikes on the front line with warplanes and helicopters. The second reason is to reduce the number of Russian heavy bombers targeting Ukrainian infrastructure facilities. To achieve these goals, the Ukrainian Air Force launched attacks on the Crimean Peninsula with historical swarms of drones. The first airstrike in Crimea was carried out at around 6 o'clock yesterday morning. The route of the unmanned aerial vehicles of the Ukrainian forces used in the first attack was quite complicated. This complex route revealed an interesting fact. Ukrainian forces had virtually mapped the locations of Russian air defense systems in Crimea. Therefore, Kyiv was able to advance the drones on a much more efficient route. In previous attacks by Ukrainian forces in Crimea, the route of drones was quite planar. For this reason, previous attacks have often targeted the Crimean city of Sevastopol. Now, the Russians have concentrated their air defense systems on the westernmost part of the peninsula. The Ukrainian forces, on the other hand, took this tactic of the Russians into account and advanced their drones on a route that stretched between Crimea and Kherson for a certain period of time. After bypassing the Russian air defense systems, the Ukrainian drones changed their course and began to move towards Sevastopol, one of the most targeted cities on the peninsula. In this way, the chances of the Russians interfering with the Ukrainian drones are much lower. Ukrainian forces, on the other hand, launched another drone operation immediately after the attack, which they carried out at 6 a.m. yesterday, in order to increase their chances of reaching Russian military targets in Crimea even more. The second UAV attack by the Ukrainian Air Force took place about an hour after the first one, that is around 7 a.m. The unmanned aerial vehicles used by the Ukrainian forces in the second attack followed the route of the first attack and targeted Sevastopol. There was also another reason why Ukraine used the same route again in the second attack. The Russian air defense systems, which had used all the missile supply in the first attack, would be ineffective in the second one carried out by the Ukrainian forces within an interval of an hour. This mind game by the Ukrainian forces was quite successful. The first Ukrainian drone attack did not get very far on the peninsula, but the second one locked onto Saky Airport in Crimea, Belbek Airport, and Russia's Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol. It is reported that Ukrainian forces used 10 Mugen 5 unmanned aerial vehicles in these attacks. The incident, which infuriated the Moscow administration, also frightened the residents of the region in Crimea. It was claimed that as a result of these airstrikes by the Ukrainian forces, some parts of the Russian military base areas on the peninsula were damaged, but so far there has been no information about loss of life from the region. These striking Crimean attacks by Ukrainian forces actually made quite a stir. In addition, Ukraine has determined the strategic air defense systems areas of Russia thanks to these drone attacks. At this point, the importance of these attacks increases much more, The reason is that the Ukrainian forces now have the opportunity to launch very striking airstrikes on Crimea at any time. With these attacks, Ukraine began to control the western coast of the peninsula. It is predicted that such airstrikes will increase again in the coming days in Crimea. Ukraine, on the other hand, is expected to target the center and east coast of the peninsula in its next possible attacks. Because Russia's air defense systems are not unlimited, it is impossible for Moscow to protect all Russian military bases in Crimea. Also, considering these recent attacks by Ukrainian forces in Crimea, successive UAVs often greatly distract air defense operators, or multiple targets can cause air defense systems to overload. The ability of the Ukrainian forces to easily change the altitudes of the drones sent to Crimea is a factor that increases the success rate of airstrikes in this region as well. This feature also causes drones to be detected much later by air defense systems. Unmanned aerial vehicle images in Crimea, which emerged after the attacks, also had a great impact on the agenda. These striking attacks indicate that Ukrainian forces will make Crimea a target, especially during this week. In addition to UAVs, submarine drones are among the vehicles that Ukrainian forces may use to target the peninsula. We've seen a few examples of these submarine drones before the attacks targeted the Russian Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol. Shore footage of the submarine drone did not receive the initially expected attention. But then, as a result of the air attacks of the Ukrainian forces on Sevastopol, Russia had to evaluate all the information it got on the peninsula. As the Ultimate Ukraine YouTube channel, all of our findings are created by the work and analysis of our field warfare expert team and are based on data from the US, UK, Russia and Ukraine Ministries of Defense and independent war analysis and monitoring sources. Ukraine has become quite active this week, not only on the Crimean Peninsula, but also on the southern front lines. Russia has recently increased its defensive fortifications in the central Zaporizhia Oblast in southern Ukraine, particularly between the towns of Vasilivka and Orikhiv, illustrating its concern about the possibility of a major Ukrainian offensive in the region. We know that Russian commanders are particularly concerned about the possibility of a major Ukrainian attack in northern Luhansk Oblast or Zaporizhia. If Ukraine makes any major advances in Zaporizhia, it could seriously endanger Russia's land bridge linking the Rostov region with Crimea. Meanwhile, Ukraine's success in Luhansk will further undermine Russia's declared aim of liberating the Donbas region. Deciding which of these potential threats to prioritize is probably a major challenge for Russian operational planners. But right now, the priority of the Russians is to increase the measures of the recent drone attacks in Crimea. While the heat of the war has increased so much, it would not come as a surprise to us or Russia that the Ukrainian forces carried out more air operations on this critical front line, namely Crimea and its surroundings, apart from these latest attacks. Therefore, as we have told you in almost every video on the subject, the Crimean Peninsula has now become the breaking point of the war. All rights of this video and text belong to Ultimate Ukraine YouTube channel. Thank you for watching us.